So we're excited. We think we're at a really exciting time in our industry, which is changing like crazy. And I have the privilege of moderating the conversation with you, Claudette. We're going to talk a little bit about your passion for brand building and deliberate disruption and your new role. We joked when we met that I think you've been at Post a long 4 months now. So you're still drinking from the fire hose?
Pretty much, yes.
But let's get started and introduce yourself and whatever you want to share with us about your role at Post.
Yeah, I mean, I've operated in the, I want to say in the marketing. I've been in marketing for about 25 years now. Started my career actually in Asia. So I was working, I think the first 10 years of my career over in Singapore, working for Coca-Cola, Kraft, which is now Mondelez, and then coming over to the US, continued my kind of path working with awesome companies on global brands, right? Mondelez being one that transferred me over, Kellogg's, Reckitt Benckiser, and now here at Post. So a lot of my career has been in marketing around CPG and healthcare, I would say. And that's really been my experience to date. So, yep, in Post for 4 months. So I probably won't be able to answer all of your questions, I think, but enough to be dangerous.
Yeah, well, again, super excited to get into the conversation. Even when we had our meeting, whatever day that was, Monday, I think, it was hard to hang up. So, and I'm excited for people that are joining us and viewing. Please feel free to ask questions. This is such a great opportunity to have this time with her. So please feel free to put questions in the chat and we'll get to you later. So you and I talked about, look, so much has changed since 2019, the way consumers consume and buy your product, the way they consume media, the way they're watching content. Coming into this role at Post, what I want to get first to is what hasn't changed? What hasn't changed for you as a marketer?
So, I think two things. There's always an element of being a marketer within culture, right? So I do think what hasn't changed for me and what hasn't changed for, in my observations with a lot of the teams I work with, is this idea of always staying like curious, right? The idea of curiosity that fuels how you think about things differently, look at things differently, activate against things differently. I think that the aspect of curiosity from a spirit perspective has not changed, right? Even through COVID, I think if anything, it's just made us more curious than anything else. I think from a marketing perspective, what hasn't changed to me is this idea of storytelling. I've been in Post now for 4 months, and as we continue to really think about how to elevate our brands, right? How do we bring our brands into culture? I mean, we've been talking a lot about the idea of telling stories. It's as simple as that, right? That's what we do. That's how we tell stories in service of our business and our products. I think that has not changed even through. I remember early on in my career, I feel like we tell stories all the time. And there are brands that do it very, very well, right? Which I admire, which I continue to keep a pulse on top of what we want to do at Post as well.
Fabulous. And so true. Listen, you still have to tell the story. It's changing how we're getting that story out, but the telling of the story still remains the core. One of the interesting things you mentioned in our conversation as well was this idea of deliberate disruption. Tell me what your philosophy is about that.
Yeah, so I've had the privilege to work across different organizations, right? And every time, you step into something new, or you observe other people stepping into something new, I think disruption is it's actually very healthy. I actually firmly believe, as a philosophy, comfort is the enemy, right? So, as we continue to evolve our organizations, our teams, and our talent, and the way we go to market, that's really important. But I add in the word deliberate there because disruption often creates chaos, and I think sometimes chaos is just an end result of what we do as we think about changing and getting people or cultures or work out of the comfort zone. I think just making sure we do it through a lens of what we can keep stabilized. If there's not a need for things, if there are some foundational things that we need to make sure we keep the momentum going while we drive disruption, is just healthy and thoughtful. So I think I say this because, we always talk about disruption as a very sexy tool, and it is. I think just making sure we're deliberate around our choices and our priorities of what we choose to get after the big wins first are really important.
Yeah, I think that's super smart. And I think we see, sometimes the excitement to be a disruptor, again, to your point, losing focus on what the goal was for the disruption, right? If there's a planned goal for your disruption, then it makes perfect sense. But to do it just for the sake of doing it doesn't necessarily drive your brand forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big believer in just, if the strategy is not right or tight the first round, disrupting it and getting it tight and right is super important, because that should guide, right? And that should be the glide path for how, with the end in mind, on where we should be going. And then the pivots are absolutely the right thing to do, because nothing is ever permanent. We've seen it through the last year, right? But if you have the right foundations, it makes it so much easier to drive disruption in a meaningful way.
Well said.
I like to do a lot of hand actions as I talk.
Okay, I'm with you. I do it too.
Apologize.
No, it works. Well, and I'm going to steal, that comfort is the enemy, because I agree wholeheartedly, regardless of which side of the business you sit on, whether it's the side that I'm on in the media or the advertising marketer yourself. I think getting comfortable with discomfort, is kind of the new now. If you're not, you're in the wrong business.
Absolutely. And I think media too, even more so traditional media now, like TV, like radio, and some of these other more broadcast driven media channels. I think actually it's ripe to think about even just more real time, like how do, like a lot of the social digital tools that we use today, how do you create the real time feedback loop, get data that accurately keeps a pulse on how you're spending? Is your spending effective, right? Is your messages engaging enough with the consumers? I feel like the social digital piece is pretty advanced because of all the tech enablers underneath it. I think now is, the whole broadcast industry, there's so much opportunity to just be at pace with some of the, with tech players,
Absolutely. And, that's really interestingly how and why Ampersand really created what we created, was to bring the good and the successes of digital to television. And we're seeing other players join that as well, because I think that's, to your point, there's too much available technology to start to understand real time impact, to go back to being traditional, right? It's just going to have to evolve, because marketing and brands are moving too quickly to be slowed down and wait for some sort of method that needs to evolve. So I think you're spot on with where the industry is going and where brands are and what brands are looking for support from the industry.
Yeah.
As you think about disruption, you think about the new conversations with brands. How do you bring that curiosity that you're talking about, that curiosity, that deliberate disruption? How do you bring that to a big CPG organization? I mean, that's got to be a challenge within itself to some extent. You're at a big company.
Yeah, it starts from the people, So I would say two things. One is, how do you create the culture and how do you feed the culture, right? Creating the culture, I think a lot of it is leading by example. Now, I always believe that I'm the first to say I learn from not only people that I work for, but people that I work with. So I believe in making sure that the right behaviors are not just me alone, but how we amplify it across teams, right? Because when you have people engage and they amplify that level of curiosity, I think we all as a team get to a good place. So what I try to do is encourage my leaders to stay curious, to be more agile. I ask questions, so it helps, hopefully they think about agility in the right way, you know, or question our plans if they should be a certain way, you know, or if we should evolve it as the market evolves. So I think creating that culture is really important in terms of making sure when people should possess that element of fearlessness, should encourage that sentiment of being curious and always pressure testing our plans to always try to be better and evolve. Then I also believe that there's an aspect to feeding that culture. So you know, just meeting other industry leaders, right, such as yourself, such as other people within the agency ecosystem or even the media ecosystem, I think is really important just to tap into what's happening on the outside, because sometimes we can get very insular. The other piece of it is just creating test and learn opportunities, you know. So I'm the first one to say, especially working with my agency partners and with the teams, is I love testing and learning, and you know, whether or not you fail or succeed, you know, doing kind of small projects, you know, that don't distract too much of, you know, your headspace or your time. But one, I think it showcases you know, the teams what agility and test and learn can probably create, because you can scale it if it's meaningful enough. But also just to not be afraid. And once again, it feeds back into the culture of, you know, some of these test and learns are low risk, mid risk, but it could create either great impact or you could learn from it. You know, either way, it's never not good to learn from anything.
Absolutely. And I think exactly to your point, that curiosity and the appetite to be willing to test and learn, to take a little bit of a chance, leads to that agility, and to not trying to necessarily bank all your ROI on a test. You know, especially in the CPG world, where you have multiple brands, multiple platforms, multiple audiences. That's a lot of moving pieces to hit it out of the park every time.
Absolutely. I mean, I was just having a conversation with my media agency this morning, and we're talking about, you know, ROI is super important. Don't get me wrong. I think we always need to think about efficiencies just to reinvest back into the business, right? But I think there's an element of you never know when the next big thing is going to hit, and you don't have the historical data to really understand true ROI. Case in point, right? Before TikTok was huge, I think we were one of the first few, with a different company. My team was one of the first few to lean in on, you know, testing and learning things with TikTok, right? So for instance, hashtag challenge before it became a thing. And then like exploring creative copy from an A/B testing way to figure out what are the right memes. You know, how do you drive memes in the right way? How do you drive repetitive action in the right way so it creates a certain element of viralness? Like things like that are probably, or beta opportunities, I would say, are great test and learn opportunities with that you eventually can scale up. Because I mean, look at the success of TikTok today. You know, I'm actually really glad that we tested and learned with them as a partner like a year and a half ago. You wouldn't have done it if you went through the traditional ROI. But post the TikTok campaign, when we did our ROI assessment, it was 5x for us, right? I mean, how many media channels do you say gives us that kind of ROI? So I would say it was a risk worth leaning in, because this was the impact that came out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, it's encouraging to hear your perspective and the perspective that you're bringing in, and bringing into the industry of, look, you don't know what the next big thing is. And the only way to find out is to dip your toe in and be willing to get out there a little bit. Because again, you know, all feeding back to that original statement that you made about being uncomfortable, that steps away from tradition that we did. I would even say like in 2018, I would say so much has changed since 2018 to now, where I'm seeing more brands have a bigger appetite to be willing to get out there a little bit and try some different strategies or some new platforms, whether that's on social or different channels. Are you seeing that with your competitors as well? Do you feel like the industry as a whole for CPG has been leaning in a little more?
For sure. I mean, yeah, I would say I have. I mean, I look at, you know, some of the examples that I've recently read from, you know, giving a nod back to my old company, Mondelez, I think they're doing an awesome job on the social channels, right? On the social front with TikTok, for example. I think Campbell's is doing some cool stuff. So I think there are definitely CPG players that are definitely experimenting, but that's where I think the culture piece is really important, right? Because sometimes, especially if you are a leader of a category, it's like you don't want to shake up paradigms or break up the paradigms, right? Whereas what I love about being at Post and what I love about our spirit is we are the challenger company, you know, but because of that, we have so much fire in our belly and spirit behind what we do, where we actually could shake up paradigms and create new ones. And I think for me, that is probably a really exciting place to be. I would say though, the one caveat I would have on test and learn is I just always like to use the word deliberate before everything, because like everything needs to be intentional, right? You need to make sure that at the end of the day, while you test and learn, there needs to be either an end in mind in terms of what you're hoping to test and learn and gain from, or there needs to be a strategy that is probably unmet by other ways of going to market, and you test and learn because you want to figure out what's that new way or what could that path look like. But I think that's where the frameworks, sandboxes, and things like that are important, because you can test and learn your way through millions of experiments. I think, especially in the marketing world these days, it's so easy to get lost down that rabbit hole.
Oh my gosh, totally.
Right. So guided by strategy or strategic intent, at least, is what I would say, something we need to just be mindful of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that fits to the next thing I wanted to talk about a little bit about how are you thinking about or utilizing data to inform some of your test and learns. I know you have a background coming from, you know, insights and data to fuel your marketing. And are you using that, utilizing information to help choose your audiences, your platforms? How are you thinking about data today?
I don't even think I can keep up with the world of data and all the new things that are, you know, that are currently coming down the pipeline, I would say. But I try my best, right? And I think that's where, if you think about three things, right, it's around, as you think about either consumer or the shopper, I would say one is, how do you understand certain patterns and behavior, certain patterns, right? So the patterns and the repetition, and that really helps us understand kind of the where to go hunt, right? And the how to go hunt. And then the I think so patterns is one, motivations is the other thing that I try to understand. Is always asking the why questions, because it's what fuels their pattern and behaviors, right? So understanding consumer motivations are important. And then the third piece is prediction, right? Who knew that COVID was going to hit? But when it did, there were some in the industry that quickly looked and predicted the COVID curve of the different phases, from, you know, from anxiety, where we started stock up, to all the way to boredom and stuff like that. We were able to activate against the trend curve ahead of time. So I would say patterns, motivations, predictions. Now, these three need different types of tools or data tools. So when you talk about first party data, when you talk about, you know, even e-com data or retailer data, I think a lot of that allows us to understand shopper consumer patterns, for us to be able to know where do we go target or where do we go hunt for these consumers, because the patterns are pretty repetitive for us to be able to understand. I think the motivations, though, it's a blend of just traditional tools. And I think so traditional, like insight tools, talking to the consumers, there are actually some new tools out there that's a little bit more agile, in a sense that you could be the moderator, for example, right? Or you could do a really quick box pop on 500 consumers to really understand some of their motivations. So I think there's a lot of new tools that helps you get to the traditional way of how we think about insights, which is just understanding the voice of the consumer. Then the last piece, which I'm actually really excited on, I'm trying to keep up with the trends, is around predictions. You know, a lot of AI tools these days help you predict food trends, right? They scrape the universe, figure out, from instance from QSR and things like that, what's happening in the QSR world that filters down into the CPG world. There's data around what fringe trend ends up becoming macro trend, or what fringe trends falls off into falls off the boat somewhere in the river. But there's just so much AI-driven technology that you can leverage to drive predictive insights and analytics. And I think that piece is fascinating for me I've been talking to a multitude of people, I would say, in the last couple of weeks, just trying to understand who and curate who are our best sources of folks in that way to kind of rally around. But these three things to me are really important. I believe all those three areas have different tools to help address that.
Yeah, different tools, different areas, and
yes,
different voice for each one, really.
Yeah.
So separate. And the trends that you're seeing, as you're reviewing that now moving forward, that came out of 2020, where we've seen a lot of e-commerce, obviously, growth there, and a lot of growth in what we would call nostalgic or comfort brands. Did you guys have that experience at Post as well, where you had people going for their Fruity Loops and things that they remind them of their childhood, less about health, which I think we were sort of aiming towards, right at 2019, and things seem to have shifted. Has that been true for your brands? Have you seen a shift in behavior?
I think there's always both paradigms that are helpful. I do see a big trend on the health front. People are eating healthier. There's this big trend around food as self-care, healthcare, right? Because of what we've been through, we want to take better care of our, just our health and our body in general. And health is even broader to the sense of this whole idea of wellness, right? It's kind of mind and body. So I think that the health food trends would never kind of fade away. They're always there. But you're right. I do see this whole revival of nostalgia, Pebbles for one, which is one of our iconic brands. And I appreciate Pete for bringing the Flintstones up. But, Pebbles is on fire, right? Just because of the sheer nature that nostalgia is back. And you see that too, translating into, fashion, into into food, into even like food outlets and things like that. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating trend to me. And I get it though, those days that were kind of dark and we were not so sure it was good to have on your slippers and have some childhood cereal to make you feel better.
Oh, look at that. Oh, you got this.
What?
Oh, that's so cute.
I like it. You put your own fresh take on the background, which I really appreciate.
Oh my gosh, you can't possibly be out of time already, Pete. Are we already?
A few more minutes, but I wanted to just jump in because
it's talking to Claudine. It goes so fast.
I know it's the whole day is flying by. I started this thing at 10 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, how am I going to eat? Who's going to get my kids? I don't know where my kids are right now. I don't even care right now, to be honest with you. This is really flying by. I just have a quick question. Then I want to just wrap up all the nuggets you guys did. But first of all, you're a servant manager, which I saw on your LinkedIn page, which I love. But you're also a disruptor, obviously a change agent. Which combine that, you just can inspire so many people, and you do take those responsible risks. My question would be around as a brand, as a family wholesome brand who's in everyone's cupboards. We begin our day with you guys. How do you manage and navigate brand safety off the grid, like off of traditional regulated areas? How do you protect yourself around rubbing the wrong, alignment, if you will?
From an equity perspective?
Yeah, just brand budget safety of any one of your Post brands, in an unregulated area, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like food safety, from a integrity standpoint, that comes first, right? I mean, even though my office is empty and there's no one behind me, I mean, the company is vast and we have everybody. Like, safety is actually one of our values, so and in my goal setting as we speak. So I think from a food integrity, food safety standpoint, there's no doubt that the company is all behind that. Then I think from an equity perspective, so we have definitely different segments, right? We have a lot of brands that are focused around our family, but we also have brands focused around, adults and going after the younger cohorts and all that. But I think from an equity standpoint, that's why we have a pretty sound but agile ecosystem around us to help make sure that we we continue to protect the health of our brands from an equity standpoint and how we show up and live in the world. And that I feel like we have a small but tight group of kind of custodians around, you know, our internal teams, our agency, right, our media agencies and everything else that I believe are together. We always push each other to make sure that we keep to that. I mean, I always tell the teams, I mean, I always appreciate strong points of view, especially from our agency partners, because you know, I am not all that smart, and I think a lot of these guys are way smarter being on the pulse from, you know, on the outside and working with a multitude of brands and clients every day. I believe them pushing us and us pushing them. We get to some really great creatives living in the architecture that is the core of where our brand operates.
I wouldn't say you're not smart. I'd say you're not. It's hard to stay current with everything.
It's hard to stay current, yeah.
Right.
There's a lot
very
going
smart.
on.
I think just to wrap up all your nuggets, leading with curiosity, right? Storytelling still remains the key driver to business.
Oh, absolutely.
And I love that, because a lot, again, in the digital space, you race towards that commerce offering, just right down to the ROI. You forget that you got to create emotion and then drive them there, and then they stay longer.
Absolutely.
Disruption is healthy, right? Get comfortable being uncomfortable. I mean, I tell that to my kids, like, this is as easy as it's ever going to be. So don't get
I'm
used
sure
to
they love that.
right? And then I love, you know, being a challenger brand, play with a chip on your shoulder. I mean, even if you're in first place, even Jordan coming out of Chicago, Michael Jordan would manufacture the chip to play so hard.
I always admire Tiger Woods and how he plays, right? Because he's always reinventing himself, even when he's, you know, at the top of his game. Like I think that's one sport, you know, and that's one person I actually absolutely admire, you know, that's outside of our circle.
I'm glad you said that, because I wanted to ask what my last question was, your leadership is I think phenomenal, and you know I'm a fan of your approach. Who inspires you?
I'm going to give you a generic answer, and I mean, the generic answer, which is all true. I really learn from like all my bosses that I still keep in touch with. I've learned so much from them, and they continue to be my mentors every day. And then I would say the teams that I work with, I miss so many of them from my past, but I'm glad that we're still talking. And of course, naturally, I learn from my current environment as well. But I would say my husband, I actually learned a lot of my leadership quality. I mean, my kind of the ways of working from him. I mean, to me, you know, not just because he's my husband, but I feel like I learn a lot from him whenever we have conversations. So for that reason, even though he's in supply chain, a totally different industry from me, I do learn a lot.
Well, listen, we have the next people coming in. It's always tough to rush off great conversations. It's been happening all day, but thank you for making this one great.
Thank you.
Good luck with everything, everybody. We're coming in. We got Kenny Mitchell from Snap. I changed into yellow, but the yellow background for Honey Bunch of Oats works out even better for all of us. So that's amazing.
Well done.
We got David Tyson coming back in, who's the content officer, the chief content officer for Brand Innovators. So today has a lot to do with him. See you, Lesa.
Well, Claudine just jumped, but I was about to say I'm a big Honey Bunches of Oats fan over here. You know, it's become kind of a pet name in our house. So you know, we're big fans of the Honey Bunches over here. So it's a good transition. Hey, Kenny. So great to see you, man. How's it going?
What's going on, man? It's great to see you too.
I'm so excited for this conversation, and I know we got a ton of people, tuned in here. So I was just going to say, before we kick off, for everybody who's on YouTube, if you want to submit your questions, you got to do that here on Zoom. So just make the transition so we can get to those at the end. We'll allocate some time to Q&A if any of those come in. So, but yeah, no, I'm excited to kick things off.